I'm Claire, 27, an art gallery assistant in Boston. My life was predictable: organized apartment, steady job, quiet evenings. That changed when my mother appeared at my door looking haunted. She handed me a dusty envelope, her hands trembling. "Pack a bag. You have 24 hours," she whispered. The fear in her eyes made my stomach drop. Something was terribly wrong. I always sensed she kept secrets, but nothing prepared me for what that envelope contained. If you're curious about what I discovered and how it changed everything, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me on this journey. My life before that night was comfortable, if somewhat unremarkable. I worked at the Newberry Gallery in downtown Boston, a prestigious establishment where wealthy collectors purchased artwork that cost more than my annual salary. My apartment was a small but tasteful one-bedroom in Cambridge, decorated in minimalist style with carefully chosen art pieces, mostly prints from local artists whose work I admired but couldn't afford originals. Every morning followed the same routine: alarm at 6:30, yoga for 30 minutes, shower, breakfast smoothie, and the red line to Park Street. I'd reach the gallery by 8:45, 15 minutes before opening, giving me time to check emails and prepare for the day. My boss Diana appreciated my punctuality and attention to detail. I was good at my job, knowledgeable about the artwork, personable with clients, efficient with paperwork. Nothing exceptional, but reliable. My childhood in suburban Connecticut had been similarly placid. My mother Margaret raised me alone in a modest 3-bedroom house with blue shutters and a small backyard garden she tended meticulously. She worked as a librarian at the local public library, bringing home stacks of books that fueled my imagination. We were comfortable financially, not wealthy, but never wanting for necessities. "Your father died before you were born," she would say whenever I asked, which wasn't often. She kept a single photo of him on her nightstand, a handsome man with a serious expression. Michael Thompson, American accountant, killed in a car accident when my mother was 5 months pregnant. The story was simple, straightforward, and apparently complete. I stopped asking for details by the time I was 10. Our relationship was loving but reserved. Margaret was warm, caring, and provided everything I needed, but there was always something held back. A distance I couldn't quite cross, questions she would gently deflect. At the time, I attributed it to grief over my father, a subject too painful to discuss. Now, I understand it was something else entirely. Just 2 weeks before that fateful evening with the envelope, I'd celebrated my 27th birthday. A small gathering at my apartment, 5 friends from the gallery, takeout Thai food, a bottle of Prosecco. Margaret had called to wish me happy birthday, but declined my invitation to join us. She rarely visited Boston, preferring I come to Connecticut on holidays and occasional weekends. "The big city makes me anxious," she would say. "Too many people, too much noise." At the time, it seemed like a reasonable preference for a small-town librarian who enjoyed her quiet life. Since childhood, I'd experienced recurring dreams that always left me unsettled upon waking. Dreams of cobblestone streets and ancient buildings. I'd never seen faces speaking words I couldn't understand. A sense of both belonging and danger. I'd mentioned these dreams to my mother once, and the flash of alarm in her eyes was so pronounced that I never brought them up again. Margaret was subtly but firmly overprotective throughout my life. When my high school French class planned a trip to Paris, she found reasons why I shouldn't go: the cost, the danger of international travel, the time away from studies. When I considered studying abroad in college, she had a minor health scare that resulted in me staying closer to home. It was never outright refusal, just well-placed concern that guided me toward the safer choice. The pattern continued into adulthood. 3 months before the envelope appeared, I'd been considering applying for a position at a more prestigious gallery in Chicago. The opportunity excited me: better pay, more responsibility, exposure to a different art scene. When I mentioned it to Margaret during our weekly phone call, her response was measured but discouraging. "Chicago is so far, Claire, and the crime rate there is terrible. Besides, Diana values you at Newberry. Sometimes the familiar is better than the unknown." By the end of the call, I'd talked myself out of applying. The deadline passed, and I remained in Boston, occasionally wondering what might have happened if I'd taken the chance. The morning before everything changed, I noticed 3 missed calls from my mother while I was in a meeting with a client. Unusual, but not alarming. I planned to call her back during my lunch break, but a sudden influx of customers kept me busy. By closing time, I'd forgotten entirely. It wasn't until later that I realized those calls were the first warning of the storm about to engulf my carefully constructed life. That evening, I was preparing a simple dinner, pasta with vegetables from the farmer's market, when the buzzer to my apartment sounded. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the intercom, my mother's voice came through, tense and breathless. "Claire, it's me. Please let me up right away." I buzzed her in, confused and suddenly anxious. Margaret never visited without planning weeks in advance. Something was wrong. The rapid knocking at my door made me jump. When I opened it, the woman standing there barely resembled my composed, neat librarian mother. Margaret's silver-streaked brown hair was disheveled, her usually immaculate clothes wrinkled as if she'd been wearing them for days. Most alarming were her eyes, red-rimmed and darting nervously up and down the hallway. "Can I come in?" she asked, already pushing past me into the apartment. She immediately moved to the windows, pulling curtains closed with quick, decisive movements. "Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me." She didn't answer immediately, instead checking the locks on my door and peering through the peephole. Finally satisfied, she turned to face me, clutching a worn manila envelope to her chest. "I'm sorry to arrive like this, but there wasn't time to call ahead properly. They found us, Claire." "Who found us? What are you talking about?" Her laugh was hollow, almost hysterical. "I hoped this day would never come. I prayed for it. 26 years of looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. I thought maybe we'd escaped for good." I guided her to my small dining table, where my half-prepared dinner sat forgotten. "Mom, you're not making sense. Please just tell me what's happening." Margaret placed the envelope on the table between us. It was legal-sized, bulging with contents. The manila color faded to a dull yellow at the edges. Dust came away on my fingers when I touched it. The writing on the front was in faded blue ink, words in what looked like a foreign language, along with a strange postmark I didn't recognize. "Everything you need to know is in here," she said, pushing it toward me. "But first, listen carefully. You need to pack a bag. Essentials only. Clothes for a week, toiletries, comfortable shoes. Bring all the cash you have, but leave your credit cards. No electronics, they can be tracked." "Mom, you're talking like we're in some spy movie. If you're in trouble, we should call the police." Her laugh was bitter. "The police can't help with this, Claire. Nobody can except ourselves." With trembling hands, she unclasped the envelope and removed a few items. Photographs of people I'd never seen, documents covered in text I couldn't read, and a small brass key that looked antique. "Who are these people?" I asked, picking up a photo of a younger version of my mother standing beside a tall, distinguished-looking man in front of an ornate building. She snatched it back quickly. "There's no time for explanations now. We have 24 hours, maybe less, before they track us here. I've made arrangements, but we need to move quickly." While I sat stunned, trying to process her words, Margaret moved to my kitchen. I could hear her making phone calls, speaking in hushed tones in what sounded nothing like English. The language was harsh, yet musical, with rolling R's and sounds I couldn't begin to reproduce. I'd never heard my mother speak anything but English. When she returned, I was still sitting at the table, the contents of the envelope now spread before me. Birth certificates, 2 different ones with different information, newspaper clippings in a foreign language, maps with locations circled in red. None of it made sense. "Mom, please, I'm not going anywhere until you explain what's happening." She checked her watch and sighed heavily. "I need to make more arrangements. The envelope contains everything. Who we really are, why we left, who's looking for us. I know it's a shock, but you need to read it all tonight. I'll return at 6 tomorrow morning, and we need to be on the road by 6:30. "You're leaving now." My voice rose in panic. Margaret cupped my face in her hands, a gesture so tender, it momentarily transported me back to childhood. "My brave girl, I'm so sorry for what's coming. Read everything. Try to understand. I did what I had to do to protect you." Before I could protest further, she was gone, leaving behind only the dusty envelope and instructions to be ready in 24 hours. The pasta water on my stove had boiled away, the pot scorched. Like my sense of reality, it had evaporated completely. The quiet of my apartment felt oppressive as I stared at the items scattered across my coffee table. With shaking hands, I began organizing the contents of the envelope, trying to make sense of what my mother had left me. The first document I examined appeared to be a birth certificate, but not the one I'd seen before. This one wasn't issued in Connecticut, as I'd always believed. According to this paper, I was born in Prague, Czech Republic, not in New Haven. My name wasn't listed as Claire Thompson, but Klara Novakova. My birth date matched what I'd always known, but everything else was different. My father's name was given as Václav Novak, occupation listed as businessman. My mother's name wasn't Margaret Thompson, but Marketa Novakova. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered to my empty apartment. but the document looked official with stamps and seals that appeared authentic. The photographs told another story entirely about the woman I knew as my mother. In one, she stood laughing beside the distinguished man from the earlier photo, both dressed formally in what appeared to be an elegant ballroom. She wore an evening gown. I couldn't imagine my modest mother owning diamonds at her throat. She looked younger, carefree, and completely different from the reserved librarian I knew. Another photo showed the same man holding an infant, presumably me, while standing in front of an imposing stone house that looked like a small mansion. The back of the photo had writing in what I now recognized as Czech, along with a date corresponding to when I would have been about 6 months old. The newspaper clippings were harder to decipher. Using my phone's translation app, I managed to understand fragments. One headline translated roughly to, "Novak Industries expands amid controversy." Another mentioned political connections questioned. A third, more alarming one, contained words like investigation, accusations, and witnesses disappeared. All featured photos of the man called Václav Novak, the man who, according to these documents, was my father. A hand-drawn map showed what appeared to be Eastern Europe, with several locations marked with X's forming a path from Prague through various cities and eventually to the coast. One location was circled multiple times with the notation Bezpečný dům, which my translation app indicated meant safe house. More unsettling were the letters written in Czech but clearly in my mother's handwriting. Though I couldn't read them, I recognized her distinctive way of crossing T's and the slight leftward slant to her script. These letters, addressed to someone named Anezka, were dated sporadically over the past 20 years. Hidden in a small pocket inside the envelope's flap, I discovered a USB drive. With growing trepidation, I plugged it into my laptop. It contained dozens of documents, scanned passports with different names, but photos of my mother and infant me financial records, showing transfers of large sums and most disturbingly, a video file simply titled Pro Claru, for Clara. With a deep breath, I clicked play. My mother's face filled the screen, looking younger than now, but older than in the photographs with Václav. She spoke in English, her accent subtly different from the one I knew. "Clara, my darling daughter. If you're watching this, it means they've found us, and I've had to give you the envelope. I recorded this 10 years ago, and I hope I've had time to explain everything in person before you see this. But if not, here is the truth." She explained that she had been Markéta Novakova, wife of Václav Novak, a wealthy businessman who rose to prominence after the fall of communism in the early 1990s. They'd lived a privileged life in Prague, moving in elite social and political circles. "Your father was ambitious and brilliant," she said, her expression complex. "When we met, he was idealistic, determined to help rebuild our country. But power changes people, Clara. The money, the connections, the influence. He began associating with dangerous people. Former secret police, corrupt politicians, even organized crime figures. According to my mother, she discovered evidence of her husband's criminal dealings, money laundering, bribery, and worse. When she confronted him, he dismissed her concerns, insisting everything he did was necessary for their future, for Czech Republic's future. Then I found documents implicating him in the disappearance of a journalist who had been investigating government corruption. The man had a family, children, and he simply vanished. That's when I knew I had to leave to take you away." She described the night everything changed, overhearing a conversation between Václav and his associates about dealing with more people who threatened their interests. When they realized she was listening, the threats began. They made it clear that I knew too much, that they couldn't trust me to stay quiet. "One of your father's associates suggested using you to ensure my cooperation. That's when I knew our lives were in danger." With the help of a few trusted friends, she planned their escape. Using forged documents, they fled first to Austria, then Germany, and eventually to the United States, where contacts helped them enter a form of unofficial witness protection. We became Margaret and Claire Thompson. I chose Boston because of its Czech community, where I could occasionally hear my native language without raising suspicions. Connecticut because it was quiet. Unremarkable a place we could disappear. The video continued, my mother explaining how she maintained a network of contacts who kept her informed about Václav's activities over the years. He had become even more powerful with connections, reaching into the highest levels of Czech government. People who opposed him continued to encounter misfortune, accidents, disappearances. I've lived in fear for 26 years, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today would be the day they found us. I discouraged you from traveling, from drawing attention to yourself, from straying too far from home, all to keep you safe. I know now this was unfair to you, that I stunted your life with my fear. For that, I am deeply sorry." Her voice broke as she continued. "If you're watching this, it means someone has betrayed us. Our location, our identities have been compromised. The plans in the envelope are our contingency, places to go, people who might still help us. Trust no one outside this list." The video ended with my mother's tear-streaked face. "You are not Claire Thompson. You are Klara Novakova. You have a heritage, a history that I've kept from you. Whether you choose to embrace it or continue running is your decision. But know that everything I did to protect you. I love you, my darling daughter." The screen went black, leaving me in stunned silence. The woman I'd known my entire life was a stranger. My entire identity was a fabrication. My father wasn't dead, but alive and apparently dangerous enough that we'd spent 26 years hiding from him. The small notebook I found next contained what appeared to be coded entries in my mother's handwriting, dates, spanning years, information I couldn't begin to decipher in my shocked state. But one thing was becoming clear. Everything I believed about myself, my life, my history was a carefully constructed lie. As the reality of my situation sank in, I realized with growing horror that if my mother was right, I had less than 24 hours before unknown threats would arrive at my doorstep, looking for a woman named Klara that I didn't even know how to be. The hours after watching the video passed in a blur of shock and frantic research. I downloaded everything from the USB drive to review more carefully, my hands still shaking with each click. Additional documents revealed more about Václav Novak, the man who was apparently my father. Online searches confirmed he was a real person, a prominent figure in Czech business and politics, his company website showing him as the distinguished silver-haired CEO of Novak Industries, with interests in energy, real estate, and telecommunications across Eastern Europe. News articles mentioned his close relationships with government officials, his philanthropic foundations, his reputation as a new European visionary. But digging deeper into less prominent sources revealed whispers of corruption investigations that mysteriously disappeared business rivals who encountered legal troubles or abruptly sold their companies to him at suspiciously low prices. One particularly disturbing article from an independent Czech news site suggested connections between Novak and the disappearance of an environmental activist who opposed one of his development projects. The article had been removed, available only through internet archives, its author no longer publishing anywhere I could find. The video my mother recorded provided crucial context, but also raised countless questions. Why now, after 26 years? Who had betrayed them? How had our cover lasted so long? The coded notebook offered no immediate answers, its entries indecipherable without a key I didn't possess. Around 2 in the morning, emotionally exhausted, but too wired to sleep, I found myself staring at photographs of the life I might have led. The stone house that would have been my childhood home, instead of the blue-shuttered Connecticut house. The elegant woman my mother had been before becoming the modest librarian I knew. The powerful man who was my father, rather than the friendly-faced accountant in the single photograph I'd grown up with. By 4 a.m., anger began replacing shock. My entire life had been built on lies. My personality, my choices, my limited ambitions. How much had been genuinely me, and how much had been shaped by my mother's fear, the art history degree instead of international relations, which had interested me more, the local college instead of the better school that would have taken me farther from home, the job that kept me comfortable but unchallenged. Even my lack of serious relationships could be traced to my mother's subtle discouragement of anything that might lead to deeper commitments or life changes. I paced my apartment, alternating between fury and terror. The sensible part of my brain suggested calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my mother, who wasn't really my mother, told me we were being hunted by Czech criminals, that my father, who wasn't really dead, might be sending people after us. With what evidence? Birth certificates in a language they couldn't read. A video that sounded like paranoid conspiracy theories. Around 5 a.m., exhausted and overwhelmed, I made a decision. I would trust my mother, at least for now. Whatever her deception, she had kept me safe for 26 years. If she believed we were in danger, I needed to take that seriously. I began packing methodically, Jeans, t-shirts, sweaters, underwear, all rolled tightly to save space in my hiking backpack. Comfortable boots, running shoes, toiletries in travel sizes. The emergency cash I kept in a hollowed-out book. Nearly $3,000 I'd save for unexpected situations, though I'd never imagined anything like this. Each item I selected felt like a goodbye to the life I'd known. The framed print from my favorite local artist I couldn't take. The collection of art books too heavy to carry. The pottery mug from my first gallery opening. All pieces of Claire Thompson's existence that Klara Novakova would have to leave behind. As I packed, memories surfaced that suddenly made sense. My mother teaching me to always locate exits when entering a building. The game she played with me as a child to memorize license plates. Her insistence that I learn to drive manual transmission because you never know when it might be necessary. Her unexplained knowledge of Czech cuisine, which she'd claimed came from an old cookbook. I removed the SIM card from my phone as instructed in one of the documents, placing the phone itself on my kitchen counter. According to the notes, I would get a new burner phone at our first destination. I copied essential information from the USB drive to a small flash drive I could keep on a cord around my neck, then wiped my laptop's browsing history and powered it down. Just before 6, I did a final check of the apartment and froze. Through my kitchen window, I could see an unfamiliar black sedan parked across the street. Not there when I'd looked an hour earlier. 2 men sat inside, not moving, facing my building. My heart hammered in my chest as I dropped to the floor, crawling away from the window. Could it be coincidence, a rideshare waiting for a passenger? Or were these the people my mother feared already closing in? I grabbed my backpack and the envelope, moving to the door to wait for my mother. The deadbolt seemed suddenly flimsy protection against whatever threat lurked outside. For the first time, I truly understood the fear my mother must have lived with every day for 26 years. At exactly 6 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Instead of knocking, my mother's voice came through the door, soft but urgent. "Claire, it's me. Let me in quickly." I peered through the peephole to confirm it was her before unlocking the door. As she slipped inside, I whispered, "There's a car outside with 2 men watching the building." Her face went pale. "Then we have even less time than I thought. Are you ready?" As I nodded, hefting my backpack, a sound from the hallway made us both freeze. The unmistakable noise of the building's security door opening, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. The early morning sun hadn't yet risen when my mother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Service stairs, now!" she hissed, already moving toward the back of my apartment. "Wait," I insisted, planting my feet. "I packed like you said. I read everything. But I'm not taking another step until you tell me exactly what's happening. Who's after us? How did they find us after all this time?" Even as I spoke, the footsteps in the hallway grew louder, slower, as if someone was checking each door. My mother's eyes darted to my apartment entrance, then back to me. "Someone from the old network betrayed us," she whispered. "Joseph, he was supposed to be our most loyal friend. Last week he contacted me after years of silence, warning that someone was asking questions about a woman who left Prague with an infant in 1998. Yesterday he called again, but his voice was different. He asked questions he already knew the answers to. They got to him, Claire." "They, who exactly is they?" "Your father's security team, ex-military, ex-intelligence. They've been looking for us for years, but Joseph's betrayal gave them what they needed. Names, locations, our new identities." She glanced at my backpack. "Did you bring the envelope?" I nodded, patting my bag. "Everything's in here." "Good. I still have contacts in Prague, people your father doesn't know about. They're arranging new documents, a safe place." She took a deep breath. "I never wanted this life for you again, but we have no choice now." The footsteps stopped outside my door. My mother grabbed my hand and pulled me toward my bedroom, which connected to the service stairs used by maintenance. As we slipped through, a sharp knock came at my front door, followed by a man's voice calling my name, my real name. "Miss Thompson, Boston Police, we need to speak with you." My mother shook her head fiercely as I hesitated. "Not police," she mouthed silently. We descended the narrow service stairwell in tense silence, emerging into the alley behind my building. My mother led me to a battered Toyota parked half a block away. Not her usual neat sedan, but a car I'd never seen before. "Borrowed from a friend," she explained, unlocking it quickly. "Get in, stay low." As we pulled away, I glanced back to see 2 men exiting my building's front entrance, scanning the street. One spoke into a radio pointing toward our car. "They've spotted us," I said, my voice tight with fear. My mother's expression hardened as she made a sharp turn, accelerating through a yellow light. They won't catch us. I've planned for this moment for 26 years. The next hour was a blur of evasive driving, sudden turns doubling back parking briefly in garages before exiting again. My mother drove with a skill I'd never seen from her, handling the car with precision that spoke of training I couldn't imagine my librarian mother possessing. Eventually satisfied we weren't being followed, she headed north on I-95, the morning commuter traffic providing cover as we left Boston behind. "Where are we going?" I asked. "New Hampshire first. I have a friend there, Eliza. She was part of the network that helped us escape originally. Her cabin is isolated off the grid. We'll be safe there while we finalize the next steps." As the highway stretched before us, my mother began filling in the gaps that the documents and video hadn't covered. "Your father wasn't always the man he became," she said, eyes fixed on the road. "When we met shortly after the Velvet Revolution, he was brilliant, charismatic, determined to help build a new Czech Republic. We fell in love quickly, married within a year. His business grew rapidly. He had a talent for seeing opportunities others missed." She described their early years together, the growing wealth, the social prominence, the birth of their daughter. But as Václav's power increased, so did his connections to shadowy figures from the former regime and new criminal elements taking advantage of privatization. The changes were gradual. A new friend with government connections, business deals that seemed too good to be true, money that appeared from unexplained sources. When I questioned him, he always had plausible explanations. According to my mother, the breaking point came when she discovered documents linking Václav to the disappearance of Pavel Dvořák, a journalist investigating corruption in privatization deals. The man had a wife, 2 small children. After publishing an article mentioning Novak Industries, he vanished without a trace. That night, I overheard your father and his security chief discussing another problem that needed to be permanently solved. When they realized I was listening, she shuddered. The look in your father's eyes was something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, weighing what to do with me. My mother had already been secretly documenting her husband's activities, making copies of incriminating documents. That night, she contacted an old university friend with connections to human rights groups who helped arrange their escape. We left with just 2 suitcases, supposedly for a weekend trip to visit my sister. Instead, we crossed into Austria, then Germany. Your father's influence couldn't reach us in America, or so I believed. 3 hours later, we turned onto increasingly rural roads, eventually reaching a gravel driveway that wound deep into forested land. At its end stood a rustic cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. An older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes emerged as we parked, scanning the surroundings before approaching our car. "Markéta," she greeted my mother with a brief hug. "It's been too long." Her gaze shifted to me. "This can't be little Clara. My God, she looks just like you did at that age." Inside the cabin over strong coffee, the women discussed options in a mixture of English and Czech. Eliza had been part of a human rights organization that helped political refugees during the communist era. Though officially retired, she maintained connections with similar groups. "Joseph's compromise changes everything," Eliza said gravely. "We need to assume all your old identities and safe houses are burned. Václav's reach has grown considerably since you left. He has connections now with officials in multiple countries, including some here in the States." My mother nodded grimly. "We need new documents, new destinations. The Prague contact is still secure. Václav never knew about her." I sat listening, still struggling to reconcile this world of false identities and international escape networks with my quiet upbringing. Why would he still be looking for us after all this time for revenge? The women exchanged glances. "Partly," my mother said carefully, "but also because of what I took when we left." She reached into her bag and removed a small leather pouch I hadn't seen before. From it, she extracted a USB drive, different from the one I'd found in the envelope. "Evidence," she said simply. "Not just of the journalist's disappearance, but financial records, meeting notes, names. Enough to destroy your father and many powerful people connected to him. I kept it as insurance in case we were ever found." Eliza was arranging our next moves: transportation to Canada, then flights to Europe using temporary documents her contacts would provide. We would meet my mother's Prague contact, a woman named Lenka, who would help us disappear again with new identities. As the women finalized details, I stepped outside for air, my mind reeling with revelations. The forest surrounding the cabin was peaceful, birds calling in the afternoon sun. It seemed impossible that danger could penetrate this tranquility. Then I heard it, the distant sound of vehicles on the gravel road. Someone's coming, I called, rushing back inside. Eliza moved to a window, peering through binoculars kept by the sill. Her expression confirmed my fears. 2 SUVs, men in suits. They're armed. How? My mother gasped. We were careful. No one followed us. Your phone, Eliza said, turning to me. Did you bring your phone? No, I left it at the apartment like the instructions said. Your laptop, tablet, anything electronic? I shook my head, then froze. My watch, my fitness watch. I looked down at my wrist in horror. I forgot about it. They tracked the GPS, Eliza said grimly, already moving to a cabinet where she removed a shotgun. You have 2 minutes before they reach the cabin. Take the trail behind the woodshed. It leads to an old hunting blind half a mile in. Stay there until dark, then follow the stream north to the highway. My contact will meet you at the gas station there at midnight. My mother grabbed our essential documents and the evidence USB. Eliza, come with us. The older woman shook her head. I'll slow them down, give you time. They don't know me. I'm just an old woman who'll act surprised at their questions. She pressed a set of car keys into my mother's hand. My truck is hidden behind the woodshed. Go. Now. We slipped out the back door as the vehicles approached the front of the cabin. The forest trail was narrow, difficult to spot unless you knew it was there. My mother moved with surprising agility, guiding me deeper into the woods. We'd covered perhaps a quarter mile when shouts erupted behind us, followed by the crack of a gunshot. My mother gasped, stumbling momentarily before regaining her footing. Mom, I whispered urgently. Keep moving, she insisted, though I could now see she was clutching her side, blood seeping between her fingers. The trail forked ahead. My mother made a split-second decision. You take the right fork to the blind. I'll take left, draw them away. No, I'm not leaving you. Clara, listen to me. Her eyes were intense, boring into mine. You need to get to Prague. Find Lenka. She knows what to do with the evidence. She pressed the USB drive and a small notebook into my hand. This is more important than either of us now. Before I could protest further, she shoved me toward the right fork and took off down the left, making deliberate noise to attract attention. I stood frozen, torn between following her instructions and staying with her. Then came the sounds of pursuit, breaking branches, men's voices calling to each other. With a silent prayer for my mother's safety, I turned and ran along the right fork, moving as quietly as possible, trying to remember everything from the one hunting trip my mother had inexplicably insisted I experience in high school. Step carefully. Avoid breaking twigs. Use trees as cover. The hunting blind was exactly where Eliza had described, a small camouflaged shelter overlooking a natural clearing. I crawled inside, making myself as small as possible, and waited, listening to the forest sounds, trying to distinguish natural noises from human pursuit. Hours passed. The gunshot replayed in my mind along with the image of blood on my mother's shirt. Was she captured, injured badly? My fear for her competed with growing awareness that I was now alone, running from dangers I barely understood with responsibilities I never asked for. As darkness fell, I heard vehicles leaving in the distance. Following Eliza's instructions, I made my way to the stream and followed it north each step, taking me further from everything familiar and deeper into the unknown life of Klara Novakova. Midnight found me huddled in the shadows behind a rural gas station, watching every approaching vehicle with a mixture of hope and dread. My mother hadn't appeared at the rendezvous point. Neither had Eliza. The realization that I was truly alone settled over me like a physical weight. A battered blue pickup truck pulled into the lot, driving slowly past the pumps before parking near the edge of the property. A woman stepped out, middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, scanning the surroundings in a way that struck me as deliberately casual. She matched the description Eliza had given of her contact. Taking a deep breath, I approached, using the recognition phrase I'd been told. I heard the fishing is good at Squam Lake this time of year. Relief flickered across her face. Better at dawn than dusk, she responded with the correct countersign. Where are the others? The lump in my throat made it difficult to speak. There was trouble. They didn't make it to the meeting point. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. Get in, quickly. As we drove through the night, I learned her name was Teresa, a former immigration attorney who now helped people with unique documentation needs. She asked few questions about what had happened at the cabin, focusing instead on immediate logistics. Border crossing into Canada is arranged for tomorrow morning. Small checkpoint agent who doesn't ask too many questions. From Montreal, you'll fly to Frankfurt, then Prague. Your contact there is expecting you within the week. I need to know if my mother is alive, I insisted. We can't just leave if she's been captured or hurt. Teresa's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I understand, but we have limited resources. If Marketa is alive, she knows how to contact us. The best thing you can do is complete the mission she gave you. The mission. The evidence on the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. The coded notebook I couldn't read. The responsibility I never asked for. We spent that night in a small motel paid for in cash. While Teresa slept, I used the room's ancient desktop computer to search news sites for any reports of incidents near Eliza's cabin. Nothing. Either the authorities weren't involved or the story was being suppressed. I also searched for more information about Václav Novak. Recent articles showed him at political fundraisers cutting ribbons at new development projects, receiving awards for philanthropy. His company website featured a section on family values that made my stomach turn. There was no mention of a wife who had fled with their child, no acknowledgement that he had a daughter. By morning, Teresa had procured me a basic disguise, hair dye to transform my brown hair to blonde glasses, and clothes different from my usual style. My new temporary identity was Emily Wilson, Canadian student returning home from a semester abroad. The border crossing went smoothly, just as Teresa had promised. The agent barely glanced at my falsified documents before waving us through. In Montreal, she delivered me to another contact who provided a passport for my flight to Europe. "From here, you're on your own," Teresa said as we parted. "Memorize this number. If you're compromised in Prague, call it exactly once, let it ring twice, then hang up. A new extraction plan will be implemented." Standing alone in the Montreal airport, I felt the full weight of my situation crash down. 3 days ago, I had been Claire Thompson art gallery assistant with a predictable life. Now, I was a fugitive traveling on false documents, carrying evidence that could topple powerful people with no idea if my mother was alive or dead. The flights passed in a blur of anxiety. In Frankfurt, I nearly turned back, almost convinced myself that this was all an elaborate delusion. But the evidence was too real, the danger too immediate. I boarded the final flight to Prague, a city I had no conscious memory of, but which was supposedly my birthplace. Prague welcomed me with Gothic spires and red-roofed buildings that stirred something deep in my subconscious. The architecture matched fragments of my recurring dreams, triggering disorienting flashes of déjà vu as my taxi wound through narrow streets toward the address I'd been given. Lenka, my mother's contact, proved to be a stern-faced woman in her 60s who operated a small bookshop in the Malastrana district. She greeted me not with warmth, but with efficient practicality, showing me to a small apartment above her store where I would stay, until arrangements are complete. "Your mother contacted me 2 days ago," she said, causing my heart to leap with hope. "She is alive but injured. She's being moved to a secure location for treatment. She cannot join you yet." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by suspicion. "How do I know you're telling the truth? How did she contact you if she was captured?" Lenka's expression softened slightly. "She escaped during transport. She told me to tell you about the blue butterfly." My breath caught. The blue butterfly was a private joke between my mother and me, stemming from an incident when I was 7 that no one else could have known about. "When can I see her?" "When it's safe. For now, we focus on the evidence." Lenka gestured to the USB drive I'd brought. "This is what we've waited 26 years for, the means to finally stop Václav Novak." The next days passed in a strange limbo of fear and discovery. Lenka introduced me to her small circle of trusted allies, a journalist from an independent news outlet, a former prosecutor who had once tried to build a case against my father before being forced to resign, a tech expert who helped decode the encrypted files on the USB drive. While they worked, I explored Prague cautiously, always wearing my disguise, always alert for surveillance. The city felt hauntingly familiar. Certain street corners, the smell of the river, the sound of church bells echoing across the old town. I found myself automatically turning down correct streets without consulting a map muscle memory from a life I couldn't consciously recall. Through Lenka, I also began learning about my extended family. My mother's sister, who still lived in Brno, cousins I'd never known I had. They had been told Marketa died in an accident abroad. Learning she was alive would endanger them, while Václav remained powerful. One afternoon, walking near Charles Bridge, I passed a newsstand displaying my father's face on a business magazine. I purchased it with trembling hands, studying the features that subtly matched my own. The same high cheekbones, the same slight asymmetry to the smile. Half my DNA came from this stranger who was hunting me. On my 5th day in Prague, Lenka burst into the apartment, her normally composed expression replaced with urgency. "They know you're in Prague. Someone recognized you near the castle yesterday. We must move immediately. As we gathered essential items, a black sedan pulled up outside the bookshop. Men in suits emerged heading for the entrance. Backstairs, Lenka hissed, leading me to a hidden door that opened onto a narrow passageway between buildings. Head for the safe house in Zhishkov. I'll create a diversion. What about the evidence, the USB? Already duplicated and distributed to trusted sources. It's in motion now, Clara. No matter what happens to us, Václav Novak will face justice. We parted at the end of the alley, Lenka heading back toward her shop, while I melted into the crowded streets, another anonymous figure among the tourists and locals. I followed her directions to the safe house, constantly checking for tails using every technique my mother had casually taught me over the years, without explaining their importance. The safe house was a modest apartment in a Soviet-era building occupied by an elderly man introduced only as the professor. He offered no explanations, simply showed me to a room and advised me not to leave. That evening, Czech news exploded with the story. An independent news outlet published detailed evidence of Václav Novak's criminal activities spanning decades, money laundering, bribery connections to disappearances of political opponents. The prosecutor who had been working with Lenka announced a reopened investigation. Financial regulators froze accounts associated with Novak Industries. My father appeared on television denouncing the allegations as fabrications by business rivals, but his normally confident demeanor showed cracks. Financial markets responded immediately. Novak Industries stock plummeting as investors fled. For 2 days, I remained in the safe house watching the scandal unfold on television. Then came the news I'd been waiting for. Lenka's coded message that my mother had arrived in Prague and was recovering at a private clinic. The professor escorted me through back streets and service entrances to avoid surveillance, eventually reaching a small medical facility disguised as a physical rehabilitation center. In a private room heavily guarded by people I assumed were part of Lenka's network, I finally reunited with my mother. She looked pale, a bandage visible beneath her hospital gown, but her eyes brightened when I entered. "Clara," she whispered, using my birth name naturally. "You did it. You brought the evidence home." We embraced, carefully mindful of her injury. "I thought I'd lost you," I said, tears flowing freely. "They caught me near the cabin but underestimated me. I've had 26 years to prepare for that moment." Her smile was grim. "The wound isn't serious. Bullet grazed my side. Eliza," I shook my head. "No news." We shared a moment of silence for the woman who had sacrificed her safety for ours. "And now," I asked finally, "what happens to us?" My mother took my hand. "That's for you to decide. The evidence has been released. Your father's empire is crumbling. We don't need to run anymore." "I don't even know who I am," I admitted. Claire or Clara, American or Czech. Everything I thought I knew about myself was a construct. "You're both," she said simply. "Claire Thompson's experiences, education, friendships, those are real. But Clara Novakova's heritage, her birthright, her family connections, those are real too. You don't have to choose one identity over the other." In the days that followed, as I remained in Prague while my mother recovered, I began the process of reconciling my dual identities. I met my aunt, my mother's sister, who had thought her dead for 26 years. I visited the stone house where I spent my first months, now owned by others, but still standing as a monument to the life I might have led. The scandal surrounding my father grew as more evidence emerged, and associates turned on him to save themselves. Václav Novak was arrested attempting to flee the country. The news showed him being led away in handcuffs, his empire collapsing around him. "Do you want to see him?" my mother asked as we watched the news coverage. "He is your father, whatever his crimes." I considered the question carefully. "Not now. Maybe someday when I've figured out who I am. For now, I need to focus on building a life that's truly mine, not one shaped by running from him or confronting him." 2 months after arriving in Prague as a frightened fugitive, I made my decision. I would reclaim my birth name Clara Novakova, but I would not abandon Claire Thompson entirely. Using my dual citizenship, now legally recognized after the truth of our situation emerged, I would build a bridge between my two worlds. Today, 3 years after opening that dusty envelope, I stand in the center of my own art gallery in Prague's Vinohrady district. Two Worlds Gallery specializes in connecting Czech and American artists, creating a cultural exchange that mirrors my own dual identity. The opening exhibition featured works exploring themes of identity secrecy and rebirth, my own journey translated into artistic expression. My mother, who now comfortably answers to both Margaret and Marketa depending on the context, has finally found peace. Her testimony was crucial in the cases against my father and his associates. Václav Novak was sentenced to 15 years for his crimes. His empire dismantled, his political allies scattered. The healing process wasn't easy. For months after settling in Prague, I experienced disorienting swings between feeling like an imposter in my birth country and a stranger to my adopted homeland. I sought therapy to help process the trauma of that frantic escape and the lifelong deception, however well-intentioned. The truth can be painful, my therapist told me, but living in fear of the truth is more damaging in the long run. I came to understand my mother's impossible choice, to keep me safe at the cost of my heritage, to protect me through necessary lies. The anger I initially felt gave way to profound respect for her strength and sacrifice. For 26 years, she lived in constant vigilance, never letting her guard down, all to give me a chance at a normal life. Eliza survived the confrontation at her cabin, though she spent weeks in the hospital recovering from her injuries. She now lives near us in Prague, her expertise in helping refugees finding new purpose with the current migration crisis. The network that once helped us escape has evolved to assist others fleeing danger, with Eliza training a new generation of helpers. The dusty envelope that upended my life now sits framed on my office wall, a reminder that identity isn't fixed, that truth eventually finds its way to the surface, that we can rebuild ourselves even after our foundations are shaken. I still have the recurring dreams of Prague streets, but they no longer disturb me. They're simply my subconscious acknowledging the connection I've always had to this place, even when I didn't consciously remember it. Sometimes in these dreams, I see my father as he was in those early photographs, young, idealistic, before power corrupted him. I visited him once in prison, a difficult meeting that brought closure, if not forgiveness. My dual identity has become my strength rather than a source of confusion. Claire's American practicality balances Clara's European sensibilities. The gallery flourishes, bringing together artists from both my worlds who might otherwise never connect. Most importantly, I've learned that while our past shape us, they don't define us. The envelope contained my history, but not my future. That remains unwritten, a blank canvas awaiting my own creative vision. If you've ever discovered that your life wasn't what you believed or felt torn between different versions of yourself, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Has anyone else experienced a moment when everything you thought you knew was suddenly questioned? What did you do with that revelation? Like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding truth after deception. And share this video with someone who might be struggling with questions of identity. Remember, sometimes losing who you thought you were is the first step to discovering who you truly are. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next video.